Welcome to yet another class of breathing and exchange of gases. In our last class, we had an idea about the various parts of our respiratory system, starting from nostrils to the alveoli. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic, that is how does exchange of gases takes place, or how is the breathing process taking place in case of human beings. Now, breathing is a process which is extracellular, and it involves various breathing organs associated with the process of that is inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation is sometimes known as your inspiration, okay, and exhalation is sometimes known as your expiration. Now, what are the various parts which are involved in this simple process, physical process of exchange of gases? Is your diaphragm, which is the muscular partition wall between the thoracic cavity, that is the chest cavity, and that of the abdominal cavity. This is a very vital role to play in the process of breathing. And secondly, the intercostal muscles. Now, what are these intercostal muscles? Last day in the skeleton I have shown you that it forms a rib cage inside which the lungs are protected. So in between the rib cages are present certain muscles which we call it as your intercostal muscles. Now, these intercostal muscles are of two types: internal intercostal muscles and external intercostal muscles. Now, both the muscles have a role in the expansion and contraction of the rib cage. That is, the chest cavity will expand, the rib cage will come forward and it will go back while exhalation process by the help of the intercostal muscles. So, these intercostal muscles which are present in between the rib cages, along with that of the movement of the diaphragm, the process of breathing takes place in case of human beings. Now, let us first see that what happens in case of your inhalation or inspiration. See, this is the structure, diagrammatic representation of the lungs. And what happens is that in case of inspiration, it is an active process. Now, how will it happen is that the air pressure inside that is your lungs, the pressure should fall here compared to that of the atmospheric pressure. Then only the air from the atmosphere will enter into our lungs. Whereas in case of your exhalation, the opposite should happen. That is, the air pressure, the intrapulmonary pressure inside this lungs should be slightly increased compared to that of the outer atmosphere. Then only the air can be pushed out of exhalation. Keep one thing in your mind: inhalation is an active process, whereas exhalation is a passive process. Okay, now what happens in case of the inhalation process is that the diaphragm is lowered. So when the diaphragm is lowered, definitely the that is your thoracic cavity is increased. The lungs expands. How? By the help of internal intercostal muscles present between the rib cages and that of the diaphragm. The intercostal muscles, that is the internal intercostal muscles, what they will do is that they will raise, they will expand the ribs and the sternum. As a result, the thoracic cavity will expand. See, the lungs will expand when the volume of the thorax is expanded. How will it increase? When the diaphragm is lowered. See, the arrows are shown down, isn't it? The arrows are shown down of the diaphragm, and the chest is raised up. The ribs and the sternum is raised up. How? By the help of the internal intercostal muscles. So, as a result, what will happen is that now the air pressure inside the lungs is lowered compared to that of the atmospheric air pressure. So, the air will now rush into this that is your lungs for the exchange of gases. So, when we breathe in, our diaphragm is lowered, the chest cavity is expanded, the ribs and the sternums are raised up. Why? Because of the action of the contraction of the internal intercostal muscles. As a result, air is pushed into our lungs. Okay. Now, what will happen in case of exhalation or expiration is that opposite will take place. Now, in this case, the diaphragm will be raised up. So when the diaphragm is raised up, definitely the chest cavity becomes, smaller, isn't it? And the ribs and the sternum are lowered. So if the ribs and the sternum, which was expanded, now they are lowered and the diaphragm is pushed up, so definitely the chamber inside is reduced. So now as a result of it, what will happen is that the pressure, the intrapulmonary pressure inside the lungs will be raised up or will be slightly higher compared to that of the atmospheric pressure, and as a result now the air will be expelled out, and it is a passive process. This one is an active process, this one is a passive process. So this is how the breathing mechanism takes place in case of your human beings. Now we will be reading to our next topic. The next topic which we are going to study is respiratory volumes and capacities. Now what do you mean by respiratory volumes and capacities? First we should understand that before this we should know one thing, that is the breathing which we had just now talked about. The breathing, a normal adult, normally when he or she is in resting condition, they breathe 12 to 16 times per minute. Okay, this is an average. Okay, this is an average. So the capacity of the lungs, that is to take in the air and hold the air, this phenomenon is known as the respiratory volume of air to be taken in or to held and to expel out. Okay, and when there is a combination of different volumes of air, then we call it as your respiratory capacities. Okay, the things are being mentioned with definition properly in your NCERT book. Please memorize them as well as understand them, that if something related to them comes, then you can be able to explain the phenomenon depending upon that. So the first thing which is discussed is your tidal volume. Now tidal volume is what? Tidal volume is that normally when we inhale or exhale, how much air do we inhale and how much air do we exhale, that is what is known as your tidal volume in normal resting condition. That means when you are not exercising, normally how much amount of air you can take in or how much of air you can expel out, that is 500 ml. Normally when we are inhaling 500 ml, and when we are exhaling the same amount, that is the 500 ml. Now if you want to count it, that in per minute how much air we are inhaling or exhaling, it depends upon your breathing rate. Suppose your breathing rate is 12 times per minute, so 12 into 500, that will be for those people who breathe 12 times per minute, and for those people, suppose anybody breathes for 16 times per minute, so 16 into 500. Like that you have to calculate that amount of air you are inhaling or exhaling per minute depending upon your breathing rate. Got it? That is the tidal volume. The next is inspiratory reserve volume. This is represented in an abbreviated form, that is your IRV. Inspiratory reserve volume means what? After you have taken normal inspiration, then extra how much air, okay, you can take in other than this 500 ml. That is forcibly, of course, isn't it? A long inhalation you are taking. Normally how you are breathing, compared to that, if you want to take some extra air other than the tidal volume, then that will be considered as your inspiratory reserve volume, and it varies between 2500 ml to 3000 ml in case of the normal human beings. Similarly, expiratory reserve volume is just the opposite of inspiratory reserve volume. That means after you have expelled 500 ml of air when you are exhaling out, now forcibly how much air more you can expel out. So forcibly you can expel out 1000 to 1100 ml of air after exhaling the 500 ml of air. Okay, so that will be called as your expiratory reserve volume. That means you can just expel it out, and here you can just take in more than the 500. Along with the 500 you can take in more 2500 to 3000 ml of air. Then residual volume. What is this residual volume? Is that after your forcible expulsion of the air, okay, that means you have forcibly expelled the air. After the tidal volume also you have expelled out this expiratory reserve volume, that is 1000 to 1100 ml air. Still some air will be still remaining in your respiratory tract, various parts of the respiratory tract, that will be treated as your residual volume of air. Now this residual volume of air is how much? It is again 1100 to 1200 ml of air still after the forcible expulsion of the air from your respiratory system. Now up to this we have talked about the volume, respiratory volumes. Now we are talking about the respiratory capacities. Okay, capacities, as I told you, that when two or more than two volumes are in combination with each other, then we call it as your respiratory capacity. Now inspiratory capacity. Inspiratory capacity means what? After a forcible that is your expiration. After the forcible expiration means you have expelled 500 ml, you have expelled along with that 1000 or 1100 ml. Now after that, inspiratory capacity, at a time how much air you can take in. How much air you can take in, that is your 2500 ml to 3000 ml of air you can take in after a forcible expiration. So it will include what? Tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. That means you are taking extra. Inspiratory reserve volume was your extra, so combination of tidal volume, which is a normal breathing, plus extra breathing how you can take, that will be your the first one, that is your inspiratory capacity, that is your maximum fullest capacity, okay, of your lungs. Expiratory capacity, just the opposite of it, that means after that is your expulsion, that is your after the forcible you have taken the air, how much you can expel out, how much maximum we can expel out will be the combination of two volumes. What it will be? One, it will be your tidal volume, and another one will be your expiratory reserve volume. Totally you can expel only up to that much, because there should be some residual air remaining in your respiratory system. So that is your TV plus ERV will be your expiratory capacity. And the last one is the vital capacity. Vital capacity of lungs will include, vital capacity means the maximum capacity. It includes your tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume plus expiratory reserve volume. So this is all about the respiratory volume and its capacities. Respiratory volumes means the amount of air we take in and we hold in, we utilize it, that is respiratory volume, various forms of it, inhalation, exhalation. Some dead spaces are there in our respiratory system which always has to be filled up with air, so those all will be counted in. And respiratory capacities means when there is a combination of various respiratory volume with respect to each other, then we call it as your respiratory capacity. So that's all for today's class. We will be talking about the last portion, that is how does the exchange of gases takes place in the alveoli, and what is the partial pressure when the air just gets into our system, and finally when the exchange of gases takes place between the alveoli and the blood. So that we will be discussing in our next class with a little bit discussion about the various respiratory problems which has been discussed in your syllabus. That's all for today's class.